Brian Hartline is off the board. Jeff Brohm says he's not going anywhere. Penn State is running out of options, but they did get some good news today.
You are Locked On Nittany Lions, your daily podcast on the Penn State Nittany Lions. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You are Locked On to Penn State football, and as always, thank you so much for checking out another edition of Locked On Nittany Lions, your daily source for all things Penn State sports. My name is Zach Seyko, and I'm your host of the show, credentialed media member for both Penn State football and Penn State wrestling. Well, Penn State did get some good news today. They were expected to get 0 commits for the class of 2026. They wind up with 2. We'll talk about them later on in the show. Most realistic options at this point, is it down to just Brian Daboll and Terry Smith? Because I think Penn State's running out of options with the latest news here. Brian Hartline and Jeff Brohm. I go to record, and the breaking news is that Jeff Brohm announces that he is not exploring any other options. He's going to stay at Louisville. Suppose you could say never, because nothing has been signed, but I think that's, with where we are, that's a pretty good indication that it's not going to happen. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments section, of course. Brian Hartline was the guy who I really believe could have salvaged this coaching search. If you've been an everydayer with this show, you know that I have been very, very high on Brian Hartline as a candidate. But Penn State did not agree. Pat Kraft did not agree. Did they let him get away? Hartline, why I was so quick to say that Brian Hartline was a good candidate, and I like Jeff Brohm a ton too, that, okay, you could have salvaged this coaching search with either of those candidates. Not really sure what Penn State has. Again, we'll talk about the most realistic options remaining in just a second here. But Hartline gave you upside. Will Stein, same thing. Oh, but they don't have any head coaching experience. You can't hire them. They're not proven. The 4 best programs in college football right now are all led by first-time head coaches that settled into their role. Marcus Freeman in Notre Dame, Dan Lanning in Oregon, Ryan Day in Ohio State. Day was just a coordinator. He had no head coaching experience prior. And Kirby Smart over at Georgia. All of them. First-time head coaches, no previous head coaching experience, and their programs right now are at the top. I understand the concerns with Brian Hartline, but the idea is that you take that risk knowing, and you give him the grace period to adjust to that role. South Florida ends up hiring him. That is a phenomenal hire for both sides. Brian Hartline is very well connected in the state of Florida because he played for the Miami Dolphins for a number of years in the NFL. His connections through Florida, that is a phenomenal hire for both sides. I anticipate South Florida being really good and staying on top in their respective realm. So Penn State, why did they decide to just say no? We don't want to pursue Hartline. And it defaults back to just Pat Kraft didn't think they were ready, either of Hartline or Will Stein. That there was too much risk to take one of these guys on. That they're not polished enough. You took a risk when you fired James Franklin. Did we not anticipate here that you weren't going to have to make any concessions? You were going to have to make some sacrifices. You were going to have to take a risk. You took a risk firing James Franklin in the middle of the season. You were going to have to follow it up with the same amount of risk. I understand wanting somebody that's established. Penn State is objectively no lower than top 15. This is a top 15 because depending on who you ask. But objectively, I think it's within the top 10, 9 or 10, give or take. But it's no lower than top 15. I understand wanting an established head coach, but so does everybody else. Everybody else wants an established head coach. You have to take the risk. If the whole point of this coaching search was to elevate yourself above what James Franklin was doing and where James Franklin had maxed out at Penn State, because that was the issue. 10-2 wasn't good enough. Losing to Ohio State or Oregon or whomever was the top of the Big Ten was not good enough. Losing recruiting battles to the powers that be in college football right now. You don't want to lose to them. You want to be like them. And that's what Brian Hartline in due time would have given you. You just needed that adjustment period. And I'm not so sure why Penn State and Pat Kraft were afraid of that 2 to 3 year period where, yeah, there's going to be some bumps in the road, but you're going to be better because of it. Brian Hartline is only going to get better as a head coach. And you let him walk away. You let him go. The only thing that I was concerned about with Brian Hartline, because I was confident that he would pan out, is that eventually he would go back to Ohio State if Ryan Day isn't there for the next 10, 15, 20 years. Again, could he retire? Could he go off to the NFL? Everything changes at a moment's notice. But now Brian Hartline is officially off the board. He's going to do very well at South Florida. I think he's going to do extremely well. Jeff Brohm would have been a good, not necessarily great hire, especially where we are with the circumstances and the optics of it all. But Jeff Brohm was doing something that James Franklin never did at Penn State. He won the big games. 3-1 against top 5 teams when he was at Purdue before he landed back at his alma mater in Louisville. So that was going to be tough. That's kind of the same circumstances with Kalani Sitake. I never really anticipated that Brohm was going to be readily available to be with Penn State. And then there's some rumors floating around that Penn State's president, since she was at Louisville, Jeff Brohm and her don't get along. Exactly. They didn't have a good working relationship when they were both there together at Louisville. So that was a little bit of a hang up too. But when we're talking about Brohm as a candidate, Brohm wins the big games. He upset number 2 Miami of Florida on the road as a double-digit underdog this season. He was 3-1 against top 5 teams at Purdue. He has a more recent win over Ohio State than Penn State does. These hires had the potential to get you past, again, what you were looking for. James Franklin couldn't win the big game. Jeff Brohm solves that issue. You're looking for somebody that can elevate you beyond and stop being the punching bag of the elite teams. Brian Hartline could give that to you. And now they're both off the board. Where do you go? What do you do? Terry Smith is right there. He's sitting there. He's waiting. But is that just a sympathy hire at this point? Brian Daboll, ex-New York Giants head coach. Those become the most realistic options. We'll talk about it next here on Locked On Nittany Lions. And this episode is brought to you by FanDuel. NFL Sundays move fast. One big play, and suddenly everything feels different. That's what makes live betting with FanDuel so exciting. You're not just watching the game, you're reacting to it in real time. With FanDuel, you can place bets as the action unfolds. Every drive, every momentum swing, every highlight moment. Live betting is the best when the game starts to shift. A receiver gets hot, a defense tightens up, or the momentum flips after a turnover. FanDuel lets you jump in to the moment. Live spreads and money lines adjust instantly. Player props update as guys heat up. And you can bet next touchdown scores, drive results, totals, and more. It keeps you locked into every snap, every drive, and every possibility. And lines are available for those NFL games. The Steelers and the Eagles play this weekend. The Steelers are 5.5-point underdogs to the Baltimore Ravens. The total is set at 43.5. The Eagles are slight favorites against the Los Angeles Chargers on the road. A field goal favorite, 3 points on the spread. The total is set at 40.5. If you like those lines, you can bet them over at FanDuel.com or the FanDuel app. So if you want to be right in the middle of the action this season, visit FanDuel.com and place your live bets all season long. That's FanDuel. The game moves fast, and so can you. So who are the most realistic options at this point when Penn State is just running out of all of them? Brian Daboll, or you go with the guy in the building, Terry Smith. If you've listened to other previous shows of mine, I'm not against a Brian Daboll hire, especially at this point. Especially at this point, where you missed out on candidate after candidate after candidate. Brian Daboll is a hire that still gives you upside. I know the floor is lower than low. I get it. Because especially what he's coming off of with his stint at New York with the Giants. Exposés come out that, yelling at people, getting into arguments, all that kind of stuff. Brian Daboll being a former NFL head coach, being a successful college coordinator, being a successful offensive coordinator in the NFL too. Let's talk about the positives. He helped develop Josh Allen. Part of the reason he was such a hot coaching commodity not too long ago was because he developed Josh Allen with the Buffalo Bills, and that offense was humming when he was the OC. There were Buffalo Bills fans that got tired of Joe Brady this season that were saying, oh, hey, Daboll's available. Why don't we fire Joe Brady and go get him? So he is respected and he's liked in some circles. It's tough to succeed with the New York Giants. It's tough to succeed when it comes to New York professional football. Find me the last head coach that succeeded with the New York Jets. Find me the last head coach that succeeded with the New York Giants. Technically, Brian Daboll had some success, right? He brings in Jackson Dart, starts to develop him, but obviously things are falling apart in the organization. He also did lead them to a playoff berth. So Daboll does have upside because he gives you something that you didn't have with James Franklin. He has the NFL connections. He can develop quarterbacks. By proxy, he can also, that will bring in other talent on the offensive side of the football. If you want to develop with a former NFL coach, Nick Saban disciple, he coached that one Alabama team as the offensive coordinator that won a national championship. So he's won a national title in college football. Daboll would be a good enough hire at this point in time. I've said he's not that bad of a coaching candidate. It's only because of the recency bias that people are going to dunk on him because of his time at the New York Giants. But Nick Saban didn't do well in the NFL, settled in college football. And I know these guys aren't the standard, they're the exception, but it is important to point out Nick Saban, Pete Carroll, Lane Kiffin, all did not do well at the NFL level and have done very well in the college football level. Just because you fail in the NFL does not mean that you are doomed in college football. I know Matt Patricia's not a head coach, but cast off out of the NFL. And he settled in pretty nicely as the defensive coordinator at Ohio State, coaching the number one defense. The only concern that in Daboll, he's a Penn State dad. He has an appreciation for the university. He has Northeast ties being in the state of New York, whether it's at Buffalo or with the New York Giants. How will he recruit? How will he handle NIL? Hire people that would help him do that. And then if we pivot to Terry Smith, I mean, he knows Penn State through and through. The same thing. Well, how would he handle NIL? How would he handle the transfer portal? Get people to help him with those situations. Get people to help him with those aspects of the game of college football. I do not need Brian Daboll or Terry Smith negotiating NIL deals. That's not their job. Their job is to coach football. Their job is to be the leader of a college football program, not negotiating dollars and cents, finding brand deals. You can hire other departments for that. If you allow Daboll to do what he does best, if you allow Terry Smith, the same thing, if you give him the leverage, you give him the war chest, right? Penn State is still, like I said, a top 10 program. The NIL, the assistance that you can go get. Penn State is still a desirable destination, even though a lot of candidates have said no, because they already have that at a lot of other places. Marcus Freeman at Notre Dame, Mike Elko at Texas A&M. It's comparable at those, and that's just to name a couple of them. But Penn State has those resources too. You can make it work with either Brian Daboll and Terry Smith, and I feel like I've been pretty consistent on the show with that. Now we got to get to some of the good news we heard today. Penn State got not one, but two commits in the class of 2026. Peyton Falzone, he was previously committed to Penn State and then flipped around, but now he's back. Jackson Ford, defensive end, in-state prospect, commits to the Nittany Lions. Just what that means for both of them. They have the potential to be Penn State legends. We'll talk about that next here on Locked On Nittany Lions. This episode is brought to you by Game Time. The World Cup is coming back to North America for the first time since 1994. And with 48 teams for the first time ever, it's going to be massive. But let's be honest, getting tickets is usually the hardest part. That's why the Game Time app is clutch, finally giving fans a real advantage when it comes to snagging seats. With Game Time, you can track price drops in real time, get alerts when great seats open, and buy tickets the moment they hit the app. It puts the power back in your hands and makes going to the World Cup realistic instead of impossible. You can pull up the app, and the layout makes it so simple to scroll through matchups and compare seat views. You pick a game, tap a section, and you have your tickets locked in within minutes. No confusion, no hunting for the fine print. The seat view feature is a game changer. You literally see what it's going to look like ahead of time from that seat before you go to buy. Take the guesswork out of buying World Cup tickets and every match, every concert, or event with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account. Use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, download the app, make an account, use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. Swipe, tap, ticket, go. Game Time. Welcome to Happy Valley, Peyton Falzone and Jackson Ford. Jackson Ford, the first one, and pretty consistent all the way through. He was the one that was always rumored to stick with Penn State, that he was going to stay no matter what. He gave a phenomenal interview talking about just how much he appreciated Penn State University, the values that it holds, and everything else. In-state prospect. Is that some sort of evidence that maybe, hey, Dion Barnes is going to be around with the next coaching staff? Same thing with at quarterback, because Trace McSorley was the prime recruiter here for Peyton Falzone. We'll get to Peyton Falzone in just a moment because, like I said, Jackson Ford, all the way through, it seemed like everything was pointing for him to stick with Penn State. And now he did. Jackson Ford is a top 300 overall prospect. We're going off of the 24/7 composite. He's just outside of the 250, just outside of 250 overall. He's a top 25 edge defender, top 10 prospect in the state of Pennsylvania. This isn't a sympathy commitment that he's just committing to commit. I feel like he could have gone to a handful of other programs. Yes, one of them including Virginia Tech, but he didn't. He was being recruited by Michigan. There was at one point in time before he did verbally commit to Penn State. He's now, again, these guys are officially signed. There was anticipation that he might flip to Ohio State. So that's pretty telling about who Ford is as a prospect. If he was getting attention from Michigan, Ohio State, some schools in the SEC, obviously Virginia Tech and James Franklin really wanted him. But to stay with Penn State, anything can happen in the future. Look, I'm not going to look that far. I'm not going to look that far into the future, but he's committed to Penn State now. He has the chance to go down as a Penn State legend, somebody that stuck with the university during a difficult time, a time of uncertainty, when you literally have no head coach and you're going to commit to Penn State. Same thing with Peyton Falzone. Now, Peyton Falzone, all over the place with everywhere that he's committed to 3 different schools, and he was flipped from Penn State to Auburn, actually. And then new head coach comes in because they fired their head coach too, go figure, right? And Falzone ends up decommitting. He's also an in-state prospect. Falzone is, according to 24/7 composite, top 20 quarterback prospect in the nation, just outside of the top 300. And he is the number 10 overall prospect in the state of Pennsylvania. So Penn State, do they dominate the state in a way here by getting not 1, but 2 top 10 prospects within the state? When we all kind of expected, the general expectation was that nobody was going to commit to Penn State for the class of 2026. Maybe you get Jackson Ford, but the general overall expectation was nobody was thinking that Penn State was going to get 1, let alone 2 prospects, and good ones. Solid 4 stars at or within the top 300, top 10 in the state of Pennsylvania. To talk about Peyton Falzone, Falzone was originally recruited as a tight end, but he really wants to play quarterback. He has all the athleticism you could ever ask for. He can play multiple positions. He's that good of an athlete. He started working with Drew Aller's quarterback coach. His ceiling is sky high. But can he get to that ceiling? That's to be determined. Because Falzone, as a quarterback prospect, has tons and tons and tons of upside. At 6'5", 200 pounds, he moves like he's practically a dual threat quarterback. He could be an option QB if you needed him to. He's that athletic. Gritty player, tough. Same thing with Jackson Ford. Both of those guys are extremely tough, cerebral football players with tons of upside, but they're both raw. They have the athleticism. They just need to refine the technique. If they both can do that, well, then they're going to be very good football players. But again, that's still to be determined. What it shows about them is they have heart and they have the tenacity to tough this out. The uncertainty with Penn State. That speaks volumes of who they are as individuals. And of course, for Terry Smith, for Trace McSorley, for Dion Barnes to go out there and do a little bit of recruiting work where they don't know where they're going to be. Maybe they do at the end of the day, right? Information moves so quickly. But for them to go out of their way and still recruit for Penn State, I guess that's their job because they're still employed. But they didn't have to do that. McSorley doesn't know where he's going to be in due time. Dion Barnes, same thing. There's just uncertainty. Does Terry Smith stay on another? If he doesn't get promoted, does he stay? And for them to run point on these recruitments and still get something in the class of 2026 shows that Penn State's not going to go down without fighting in this instance. And that's good news with all this uncertainty just flying around. That is where we're going to wrap things up on this edition of Locked On Nittany Lions. I appreciate each and every one of you for joining me on this show. Thank you so much. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments section. If you are new to the show, subscribe to the YouTube channel and wherever you get your podcasts. We are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day. Also, the #1 sports podcast network out there.